back on. I know Joe's in there. All right. So good morning. Good morning. Good, good. I think Sunita and Anita are together. Do we have coffee up here? Might need to get a pot.
As a matter of fact, I do have some.
I know you do.
Would you like me to do that one?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We should probably designate someone. Do you want to go see if Sunita? Yeah. All right.
And no blindfold for this meeting, please.
Our clerk wondered if we had a blindfold for him. A visor. Next time, you might want to talk to some of us about that beforehand. We can.
told me, I thought it was funny. I couldn't wait to see it.
Everything is above board.
All right, we're going to get started. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is a budget session today, a work session. So to get us started, momentarily, I'm going to turn it over to our city manager to take the lead on this. But colleagues, I wanted to let you know that we have a request for executive session right when we're done. And so I'm going to call that question as we adjourn the budget session, and we'll go downstairs into 601. And that executive session is related to labor negotiations, collective bargaining. All right, so with that, we'll get started right away, and I'll turn it over to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. Today we are continuing our conversation on going into more detail based on the preliminary proposal for the FY20 plan that you received last week. If I can have that first slide up, please. So today, as I mentioned, we presented the preliminary fiscal plan on 23rd. And today, based on our discussion from last week, we reversed the sessions back. We reversed the sessions, and today we'll cover health and environment, governmental excellence, and engage and connecting the community with some discussion on capital as well as equity. We'll have some continued conversation around capital, particularly when we discuss mobility and economic prosperity and affordability on the 7th, but we'll have a preliminary discussion of that today as it relates to overall, as well as some things related to health and environment, as well as governmental excellence. We are still on target to have our public hearing on the 14th and the deliberation on the 21st and the budget adopted on that evening. If the commission needs a little bit more time, we can come back for a session on the 23rd. You have before you today, although it looks the same in terms of the documents, the PowerPoint that we passed out last week, they're different. Today is an update on the section of the plan we'll be discussing on those three areas from the strategic plan, but we also have a supplemental guide for each of you as well. And if we can, thank you. So today we'll cover those areas as I mentioned. I've asked Assistant City Manager Doug Matthews to lead the conversation for today. Next week, Deputy City Manager Eric DeLong will lead the conversation for us. As always, I want to thank the fiscal team for their work see our CFO in the back, and he stands ready to come up as need be. And hopefully he will run to the front. He's a runner, run to the front. Should we have a question for him or his team, but I do appreciate the work that they do as well. We'll also have other staff join our Assistant City Manager today in explaining some of the areas. So with that, I will turn it over to Assistant City Manager Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Washington, Mayor, Commissioners. It's good to be in front of you. As Mark mentioned, as City Manager mentioned, we're going to start by giving an overview of how we've embedded equity into our decision-making when it comes to the budget, and follow that up with a discussion of how we've tried to approach our capital decision-making a little bit differently. What we decided to do was really give that general overview and have a discussion about that first, and then have the discussions about capital as they come up within each strategic priority, as opposed to trying to tackle all of the capital at one time. So we're going to go through those first two things. We'll hit health and environment, and then we'll hit a pause so that you all can get your questions answered, and hopefully we can have a good discussion in each area, and then we'll move on to the next one if that's fair. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Stacy Stout, who's going to talk a little bit about our equity approach.
Thank you. Good morning. As a recap of the equity statement and strategic plan on page 41 of your preliminary fiscal plan, equity is now an official value of the city to leverage city influence to intentionally remove and prevent barriers created by systemic and institutional injustice. As you know, equity is also a lens on how we see and approach the work moving forward. The GARE, the Government Reliance on Race and Equity Toolkit, is a framework for this approach that has decision makers disaggregating relevant data by race and ethnicity, asking who benefits, who had voice in the decision, and other filter questions to help us make those decisions. Also, as you see in the strategic plan, equity is a key strategy to achieve our overall mission to elevate quality of life through excellent city services. Equity is a key part of excellence. And lastly, equity is our goal. It's our vision to be nationally recognized as an equitable city where all have an opportunity for a high quality of life. And so I just thank you for your leadership in creating this framework. The first objective in the strategic plan outlines our commitment to creating a structure within city operations to lift up racial equity throughout our organization, so each department has the knowledge, skills, and support to identify ways the department can advance equity and eliminate barriers. We have already made progress on this objective as the city has reorganized the function of diversity and inclusion by moving it from administrative services group to the executive office. This newly elevated and reorganized office is now formally represented in cabinet by myself. I look forward to working with the D&I team and city colleagues to accomplish our goals. The next slide. So just a recap of the definitions. We define here at the city currently as equity as a condition achieved when people have the tools, resources, and connections necessary to be fully engaged and prepared to benefit from the opportunities they seek. Also, the city is dedicated to advancing equitable outcomes and opportunities by leading with racial equity to address the root causes of the disparities. Next slide. So, as you know, it's one of our 6 values to be embedded into all our decisions, policies, and practices, and it has been embedded throughout all the pillars of the strategic plan. This approach to embed into all aspects of the work is critical to advance equity more quickly, but also to reinforce that equity is not a one-off. Rather, it is part of the DNA of how we must do our work. One of the strategies in the strategic plan in doing this work is to disaggregate data by race, ethnicity, gender identity, and geography. In addition to disaggregating by ward, geographic data will be disaggregated by location in or out of the neighborhoods of focus. And as a reminder, the neighborhoods of focus are the 17 census tracts in Grand Rapids that experience concentrated poverty and inequities for all measures of success. Lastly, we are reimagining and reformatting the racial equity budget tool for FY2021 to capture a more complete picture of how equity is throughout the budget request. For now, with the information we have highlighted over $4.2 million in new investments in the fiscal year 20 proposed budget that we believe will advance equity in addition to the third ward equity fund projects. Those are listed on page 18 and through 20 in the city manager's budget letter, which you have. Next slide. So this budget tool was adapted from GARE, and the first time we used it was for fiscal year 2019 to familiarize departments with using the components of the toolkit and to practice using the equity lens when developing budget requests. Each department submitted one project, and the progress has been tracked over that fiscal year. Moving forward, next slide. Okay, sorry. So the outcomes of that initial use of the toolkit, we created the eviction prevention program, was one of those that was recommended. We piloted community services liaison to support compliance with city code. We increased the pay at signups. And we launched the Neighborhood Leadership Academy, and we also are currently expanding hours and locations of income tax services, just to name a few of those projects using that specific toolkit. For FY20, the preliminary fiscal plan process, we extended the use of the toolkit, and here are a few of the highlights. The evidence-based hiring with HR, that's through Talent 2025, and the Higher Reach program, which is showing great results to eliminate bias from the hiring process. Digital inclusion survey, we know that there's a digital divide here, and how do we meet those needs if we can digitally? The results of the survey will also inform our overall city strategy for community engagement, so look forward to seeing those results. And of course, the loan collateralization support program was also submitted using the toolkit. Increase in contractor supplier diversity and outreach, bus stop improvements, a lot of work with the purchasing policies and practices to get more diverse vendors, and then of course the Grand Rapids Air Quality Initiative to make sure folks have clean air in their neighborhoods. So, we are in the process of creating shared understanding of equity within our organization and aligning our mental models on what is diversity, what is inclusion, and what truly is a strategy of equity. This alignment will take time and intentionality and is a key early step so that in future budgets, we are able to more clearly highlight city investments that advance equity. Per the strategic plan and the city manager's proposed budget, the newly reorganized D&I office will create a one-day deep dive into racial equity for new employees as they onboard with us here at the city. This training will also be available for all department leads. We will couple this learning opportunity with targeted supports to departments to help them be successful in this work, including a template tool for departments and teams to use for infusing equity into their work plans and more clearly in their FY21 budget requests. So we look forward to that. And we implemented the tool, like I mentioned, about 18 months ago. Now they have practice using this filter. So for the FY21 budget process, we will expand the tool to provide a more comprehensive look at equity throughout their entire budget request and not just the projects, and as they approach the work. We learned a lot through the process of creating the proposed FY20 budget proposal about what a future budget tool will look like. Thank you for your commitment, support, and leadership to advance equity. I look forward to being on this journey with you, city staff, and the community, and in my new role, overseeing the city's equity efforts. So thank you so much. And I'll give it back to Assistant City Manager Matthews.
Thank you, Stacy. You know, one of the things that I had the opportunity to take a look at coming in when I did was how the budget process was proceeding. Coming in right in the middle of the adoption of the strategic plan and the creation of the budget really gave me a crash course in what it is that we're doing here in Grand Rapids, and gave me an opportunity to evaluate the processes. And just as Stacy mentioned with the equity tool, we really want to arm the departments with the tools to be able to do the work efficiently and align things with the strategic plan, and that's one of the things that my team is going to be talking about over the coming year. Part of that, of course, is influencing how we make decisions in regard to the capital investments as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom Almonte, who's going to give you an outline on how that's working.
Well, thank you, Ms. Stout and Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager. As Mr. Matthews stated, I'm going to concentrate on providing a framework related to how do we, the approach that we use to make investment in the capital, and then the changes that we're making as we move forward, and why you should be looking forward in the days ahead as we continue to embed the strategic plan from the city manager into the capital investment that we are making. The slide that you have in front of you is a reminder that asset management has been used historically in this organization as the primary factor when we make decisions to make capital investment. That has allowed the organization to make investment in a variety of areas that are important to this community and to the city, not only maximizing available dollars that we have, making investment at the right time, so the life cycle of those assets can be maintained, but also making sure that we have sustainable operations and assets as we move forward. But one of the things that we have realized is that using asset management alone as a primary factor cannot, and I'm going to repeat this, cannot produce consistent, equitable investment in our community. So as we step back and look at the process that we used to use for capital investment and asset management driving that, we have to be intentional in how we make investment through our capital plan that we create. And one of the areas or initiative that we were effective in doing that is in the Vital Street. This is one of those that we can highlight as not only staff were able to embed asset management in the process, but from the beginning, we were very mindful about using balance and distribution. The pie chart that is on the screen is a reminder that not only we can produce equal distribution across all of our community, but we also can invest in all of the elements of asset management. We can also address issues related to mobility, placemaking, and any other areas related to what is important to our community related to mobility, while at the same time having equal distribution in our community. So as an organization, we know that we can actually invest in asset management, but we also can produce equal distribution and be equitable when we make those investments. So looking forward, what you're going to see is, and this is from the strategic plan created not only with the city manager, but with all of you and members from our team and the community. What you're going to see moving forward is that we're going to be embedding these areas into criteria in how we create a capital plan that reflect not only being mindful of asset management, but how can we look at the investment through an equitable lens. So as you can see on the screen, not only we're going to have investment that drive equitable outcomes, but we're also going to use equity, balanced distribution in our investment. Continue to use asset management, because the reason why we are, as a community, we have assets that have been maintained, and we are not, as a community that have billions of dollars of assets that are degrading, that we have not maintained. But we do know that an emphasis in equal distribution and being equitable is as vital to this organization and to the community. And then lastly, but not, we're going to measure what we are doing, and then we're going to report back to you through the process that the city manager has put in place as we report the strategic plan throughout the year. During the last review, the city manager highlighted some of the dollars that are embedded in the budget. $25 million out of $71 million are related to capital investment in areas of the neighborhoods of focus that we have identified as a community. We will continue to refine and expand equity, as Stacy mentioned in her presentation, and we're going to embed processes so we can track and report back to you how we're doing as we begin to embed not only asset management in the capital plan, but also how do we are mindful about balance and distribution and looking at those investments through an equitable lens. So that's the commitment that we are making as an organization through the lens of the strategic plan that the city manager has put in place. So with that.
So we're going to take a look first at what that looks like in health and environment. And yes, ma'am.
So if we have questions, should we hold them all till the end? Or if I have questions about capital, should I ask them now for Tom? Do you have a preference, city manager?
Yeah, I think we're almost through, and if we get to through this next section, we can pause and take questions after health and environment, and then we'll cover each section one at a time.
Okay.
So we're going to start by taking a look at what that looks like with the new investments in health and environment. We didn't want to go back through the deep bulleted list that the manager had provided. You've got some background with you that you can reference in terms of the new investments, but I imagine that you will have questions generally about the budget as we move forward. So we're keeping this pretty high level to give you all as much time as you need to get your questions answered. So on health and environment, you'll see, just to recap, we've got just over $1 million in new operating investments, and we've got $57.6 million in new capital investments. What we've done is we've just broken those out by some of the initiative areas that are outlined in the strategic plan. So you'll see when it comes to the carbon emissions and climate resiliency, we're at $354,000 in new investments operationally. Green spaces, $368,000, and then protecting and preserving water resources, about $402,000. From a capital investment standpoint, you'll see that we've got investments in parks, including the parkland acquisition for the 3rd Ward. We've got investments in our water resources. And we've got some investments in continuing to replace the lead service lines. So with that, we wanted to pitch it to you all so that you can get your questions answered.
Thank you, Assistant City Manager Matthews. So we'll pause, Mayor, here for any questions the commission might have before we go into the next section.
Okay, great. Colleagues, questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Park.
No, I love that we're talking about equity first. I know that wasn't our original plan, but I think that's significant, and I just want to affirm embedding it in the executive office and also embedding it in the budgeting process, because our budget shows our values, and if it's not in there, that's going to become noticeable. The only question I had around the equity section was this loan collateral support program. Kara, are you going to talk about that as a part of your presentation to us? Okay, then we don't need to. I'm very interested in seeing what that is. And I also just want to say, I brought my paperwork in today from my own personal lead service line replacement, and the mail that came to me was in English and in Spanish, and it was very clear and easy to understand, and so I just think that's movement in the right direction. I do need to know where I need to take it, though. So I'll talk to you about that.
Maybe. Good point, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner. So I have just a couple questions. The first one in regards to the lead replacement, with replacing 5% this year, are we on track to meet the new state rules and regulations that are mandating lead replacement?
Yes, Mayor, good question. That is exactly the framework that we're meeting. So,
Okay.
In fact, our influence on a statewide level helped them create this framework. So, yeah, we're meeting the requirement.
Okay, good.
Mr. Almonte, you have anything to add?
I was going to mention that, yes, we are on track, and not only, but we have made changes because of most recently, one of the changes that was made is that we were doing partial lead replacement, and now we had to do full line replacement.
Yeah.
So we worked with the legal team and revised the documents. So the first project that we are doing is actually full line replacement, so we are compliant.
Okay, great, thank you. And then my second question related to asset management and capital, and I know I read this somewhere in the budget book, but I can't remember where. And that's related to overall asset management for our buildings and vacancy. And I know even last year around this table, we talked about the fact that we have Coldbrook that's sitting vacant. We're leasing out space at 1120 that potentially could be used for city offices or city staff, that we know that we're underutilized in space at the police department. And are we looking at an overall assessment of building capacity to reduce our footprint? And I know Allison has talked about this many times, that if we're going to really move the needle on environmental sustainability and renewable energy, the first thing is to reduce your use, and part of that is to consolidate space and shrink your footprint if at all possible. So is that also a part of the plan for this year?
Well, Mayor, we certainly have that as a strategic outcome in terms of looking at our occupancy rate, in terms of facility management. I think we have a metric in the plan, just like any downtown building owner will look at occupancy in their facilities, and we're trying, I think that's a new metric. But we do have some development opportunities that we're going to be more deliberate on doing, but holistically, I would have to defer to the team regarding a strategy to implement an assessment, facility assessment. And I think that's what we're talking about. And so I'm not sure if we have a facility assessment implementation for this year.
So there are two things happening. One, Mayor, you mentioned Colebrook, and so this budget does include significant investment in decommissioning Colebrook to start the process of getting
Saw that on the list.
that facility ready for our future use or future redevelopment or both. We're also going to be looking at Colebrook to see what it can be used for on an interim basis, or potentially a longer-term basis, depending on how things roll out. And in the facilities budget, there is some money allocated for facilities study.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, commissioners, other questions? Commissioner?
Great, strong presentations coming out the gate. Thank you for setting this up, City Manager and Ms. Stout and Mr. Amonte and Mr. Matthews. I just have one really statement to make. In the observation regarding the capital investments and the example of where we've done that really well with the vital streets, I think what's interesting about that is from the onset, we talked about making sure that there was equitable distribution in those funds. And because that started at the very beginning, I think this is why we were so successful. And it makes me wonder if we almost need to start with a blank slate. I don't know what the toolkit you have for budget assessment and budget development, but I wonder if starting with a blank slate and then building from scratch would be a good way of trying to bring balance, because I think, you know, what we learned at the end of the last budget cycle was that trying to take from what already exists is challenging for people. But if nothing exists, there are no dollars allocated in any, you know, portion of your department, and you're starting to build your budget from scratch, then it's easier to find the balance and distribution as you're then making decisions about line items. But to try and take one from another, it's really challenging, even in our own personal budgets, to decide what to remove and what to add in. So just an observation, and I'm not sure exactly how the toolkit looks, but maybe that's a way that it could be embedded into the toolkit so that in the future, we can see more equity in our distributions.
Commissioner, and what you were saying is, you know, and I believe, I agree with you, by embedding within the framework the criteria that we want to see, we don't have to manage one project at a time. The projects that come out of that system will come through the lens of that criteria that we put in place. And I agree with you. I think that's why we were successful with the Vital Street, because that was part of the criteria producing the projects. What you're going to see is we're going to revise the criteria to embed all of those areas that are vital to not only to the organization, but the community. It will take some time to begin realigning project and flushing project to the point that 100% all of the projects are being looked through that lens, okay? The challenge is that we have projects in the making that we have to complete, whether it's a water main that's going in a location. But what we as a team commit to you is that once we embed the criteria into the framework, you're going to start seeing a shifting in how the investments are being made in our community through the lens of being equal distribution. So it might take a year or two or three or four or five, but as we keep moving down that line, you're going to see a perfection or alignment in how we do that.
Ms. Stout, I wanted you to have an opportunity to speak to that as well, because where we started was really looking at new initiatives. And one of the things that you referenced was we're now going to start looking at the basic operational.
Well, it's similar to what Mr. Malti said in really understanding what equity is, right? So there's equity, there's equality, there's balanced and distributed. So those are different things. And having to have these conversations internally, we need to have the same language and same understanding. And so really normalizing the conversation is really a key step. And then getting these tools in place to say, as a department looks at their overall, maybe they're still going to send letters out in English and Spanish, but they're going to look at it through a different lens. It might be bilingual, but is it still too difficult as far as literacy rates, right? Or we do outreach, but we're noticing we're getting the same outcome that isn't quite as equitable as we'd like. And so how do we change the approach to the work, right? So we can start getting to different outcomes. And so with the budget particularly, we're adapting the GARE toolkit to meet our needs because every city is unique and different, and to meet where we are. And then my job with the team and colleagues is to push this so we're further.
And if I could add, just to underscore what Ms. Stout said, there are times where the conversation will be about equality. And that is what you have in terms of the delivery system of the vital streets. You basically take whatever the budget is and divide it by 3. That does not always result in equitable outcomes if you have needs that need more investment than others. So I think we're going to have to be, we can't, as much as we're trying to standardize the metric, I think that we have to be agile to look at it in various ways. So sometimes it's a matter of division of resources, but the other times it's a matter of making sure that the outcomes are equitable, and that might require more investment in one part of the community than others. So.
Yeah, and Commissioner, I'll just follow up on that and turn to Commissioner Kelly. I couldn't agree more, and I feel like one example of that under capital investments is related to the Third Ward Park acquisition. We've all known that Third Ward needs more parkland, and it's very clear in all the maps, and we've known that for really since Green Grand Rapids. Green Grand Rapids pointed out really clearly that we need more green space and that kids in the Third Ward don't have access to parks and playgrounds like the other wards. And so that to me is a very intentional investment that gets to the equity issue. Commissioner Kelly?
Well, both of you really kind of were speaking what I was thinking about because of the difference between equality and equity. And as we look at that park acquisition, I think, and it kind of comes to mind with the conversations that we heard last night when Bingoy had his international group, and they were asking us to include their voices, and we've been doing a lot of that around the city. We've got Urban Core Collective, for example, and our neighborhood sustainability efforts, or summit efforts, excuse me. So as we do this, to really try to get community voice on what those parks are going to look like. For example, we know that childcare is a tremendous need. We're looking at Martin Luther King Park renovations. So I think there are opportunities to hear from the community about what those needs might look like and integrate it into the parkland acquisition, depending on where it is in the city and what needs to be done. And, there will certainly be things that we can't think about, but we need to hear from the community. What is that going to look like going forward? I think this is a real opportunity for us to invest our capital resources in something that's going to have an impact on equitable need in the community.
And if I can, to that end, one of the things I feel like I bring to the table is the focus on engagement, and that's one of the conversations that we've already started to have within our team. And that's something that hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit more about at the end of the presentation, because I agree that we've got to exercise that muscle, and it's got to be across all departments. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about this year.
Another question.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I was expecting to see LED conversion, either the below ground or above ground under health and environment. Is that somewhere else in the budget in terms of capital investment?
It's listed under the governmental excellence.
It is.
And the reason it's listed under governmental excellence is there's an alignment there with the smarter cities and the future cities work that we're doing. So yeah, there was some back and forth on where actually that would land in the presentation, but that's where it's located.
Okay.
Anything else? All right. City Manager?
Okay, well then we will proceed to the next section and discuss governmental excellence. And talk about those LED
Back to you.
conversions.
City Manager. So in governmental excellence, we've got 1.58 million in new operating investments and 14.5 in new capital investments. If you break that down by initiative area, if you look at embedding values, you've got 282,000. That includes a lot of the reorganization that Mark already referenced in terms of aligning the values in the executive office. High-performing employees, 168,000. That's largely the investment in wellness. Fiscal sustainability, 785,000. Facilities and workspaces, 134. And future cities, which includes LED lights, 247,000. And here you'll see the highlights from the capital investment side, which includes our asset management projects in reference to the condition of city buildings and facilities, as well as restoration of the Stabile and the street lighting infrastructure. With that, we're going to open it back up to you.
All right, questions? Can you remind me, the restoration of the Stabile, is that at the end of it's after Festival of the Arts, right? Because I know it's a pretty significant undertaking, isn't it? Like we have to encapsulate it and
Yep.
it's pretty extensive restoration effort.
We're going to have to get back to you on the timing of that.
Okay.
I'm not sure that we have that.
Okay.
But I'd ask the same question, Mayor, in terms of, in most celebrations, you would potentially lead up to the celebration with a restoration of the center of the celebration, and this seems to be the kickoff of the restoration. And so we did have that conversation, and we'll definitely get back to you on the timing of the completion of it.
Probably just be good for all of us to know, because if I remember reading about this when we first started talking about the need for restoration, I think like there's like sandblasting and it's going to be quite the undertaking, and we should probably let folks know that a portion of the Calder or the plaza itself will not be able to be used even for events and things like that, so that people who are planning ahead to have events in that space, they know that it's not available. So.
I was hoping to just spray paint it.
Why don't you go talk to the Calder Foundation about that?
Hey, you could put polka dots on it, but I understand that didn't work out very well.
No polka dots.
One FYI, colleagues, speaking of the Calder,
Wait a minute, let's be careful. Don't quote that as the headline tomorrow. That is not the headline. No, that is not it. We're going to professionally restore, strip
Yes.
it down, and perform all the required maintenance and painting
there are clear.
in an environmentally responsible way.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir, that is true. But Commissioners, just as an FYI, this isn't related to budget, but if you did not hear that on May 6th at the Econ Club, they're bringing in a speaker who is going to talk about the history of Alexander Calder and his work, and including the Stabile installation. So if you are interested in attending that, please let me know. Go ahead.
So, City Manager, I'm trying to focus on the slides that are in front of us and then try to connect them to the budget book. So when I look under governmental excellence in like the strategic planning session or the strategic plan section of the budget book, I'm seeing goals that are in here that I'm not really seeing in the slides in terms of, allocating funding to those types of goals. I don't know, I'm just trying to figure
Yeah.
out kind of
It should-
how to follow best, because I'm not expecting all of them to be in there, but I'm not
Right.
sure where.
No, the slides we used today is a highlight of what's in the, what should be in the budget book. And so if you turn to page 16, 17 in the budget book from the transmission letter,
Okay.
that is the highlight of governmental excellence. If you look at and I apologize, and next week we'll try to differentiate the colors of the handouts. But there's one that was handed out today that is called a quick guide. And if you look, for instance, on page 7 of that quick guide,
This is what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
It gives you the detailed breakdown, sort of. Now, I absolutely would prefer you stay at the policy level and not go through line item by line item, but it gives you programmatic insight on the breakdown of the proposed increases in the cost. So you have that with you, and it also tells you whether or not it is funded out of the general operating fund or some other fund.
Yeah, this is helpful. This is what I was looking for, because sometimes I know in past budget discussions, we've had the location within the full budget where the items that are being discussed, like the page number of the full budget. But this is a summary of all of those pages, and this is better than trying to find them in the book individually. So now I know to look at these two together. That'll help me to follow along better. Thank you.
And Commissioners, the parts of the budget that I reread this past weekend that I found very helpful was the section on the capital funds, and then let's see, I had it, and then the departmental funds. So I found those very helpful to kind of break down overall a number of the items that we're reviewing today.
And we did, again, we were building both at the same time. So we did attempt in those departmental summaries to highlight some of the new initiative, new investments that align to the strategic plan. So in some areas, you will see that as you read the departmental summaries. But the challenge in some is that there are some things where no one department is solely responsible for it, and there are some things that cross strategic priorities. So we just had the conversation on LED lighting. I mean, yes, we embedded it for the purposes of the budget and governmental excellence, but there is a factor that affects health and environment, and by the same token, good lighting affects safety. So there's an intersection of a lot of these initiatives, but just for the purposes of organizing the work, we had to land it in one area.
Thank you.
I just had two questions, and it's really more just kind of and I don't want to nitpick line items, but I did want to know, for this master plan, the scoping, is that something that we plan to do ourselves, or is that something that we'd have to hire a consultant?
Yeah, I think what we heard when we were engaging in the strategic plan was that we didn't want to have the full effort for the master plan, but we want to have partial effort. And so I think in the past we had $50,000 for some consulting services, and we thought that was insufficient. So I think it's a little of both. We have money in the budget for some consulting services, but we also have some staff resources that we're adding for it as well.
And then in terms of street lighting, can we just get a broad sketch in terms of how far we think that we'll get this fiscal year on that work?
I think, I'll have to have somebody check the number. I'm going off the top of my head. I thought we said it was, for the parking lot conversion, there were 30 lots.
Okay.
Is that correct?
30 lots, 120 luminaires for the parking lots. And for the overall program, I believe it's about $9 million of infrastructure that'll get started this year.
Okay.
The projects are included in the budget.
Okay.
But,
And we need to- go
Can
ahead.
I ask a follow-up question about that? But is that funding for the primary circuit or for the actual replacement of the LED poles and lights? Because I feel like unless I missed it, I feel like we haven't received an update since the RFI went out, and what the ultimate plan is after we as a body said, we're not moving forward with supporting a $20 million bond. We'll move forward with the primary circuit, knowing that that infrastructure needs to be upgraded, but we wanted to come back with a plan for full LED light conversion.
You're correct, Mayor. As a matter of fact, that's the path that we are following. The investment that you approve is about roughly close to $9 million. The bond that we issue is all to replace all of the foundation, okay, that we have. It's not to invest in LED lights. I think the city manager made a good point. And it's one of the points that some of you have made in the past. LED lights is one of 20,000 different ways that we can be a smart city. You know, we should engage in a conversation on setting what is the vision for this community and for this organization when we go down the path and investing in LED lights. Because it might be more than that. As an organization, we may want to create a framework to support a smart city in a variety of ways. But the investment currently is just to invest in the pipes and the wires.
So then going back to Commissioner Part's question, in addition to the conversion at our parking lots, is the plan to move forward with that second component of the LED lights and smart city and come up with a plan and potentially work with a third party?
Yep. So the city manager has had conversation, we had conversation, we wanted to complete the strategic plan before beginning the conversation of a smart city related to the, so once this process has been completed, then we can engage in a conversation about a smart city and what it means to us.
Okay.
And what level of investment.
I'm just wondering timeline-wise and what we are likely to see, this construction year.
And Mayor, I will say, I had a conversation yesterday with our IT director talking about some of the fiber extensions that are planned, specifically around how does that link up with our overall smart city strategy? How do we make decisions about the utilization of that as a resource? And one of the things that we're committed to this year is organizing a group that crosses multiple departments that can help in both the governance and the decision-making when it comes to these kinds of initiatives. Because I can tell you, one of the experiences that I've had is without that governance in place, and as Tom referenced, there's no shortage of ideas of what smart cities means. We've got to define what it means for us and where we really want to focus our energy and, when it's appropriate, focus our funding. And who those appropriate partners might be. So that's one of the commitments that we have going into this year.
I think both Mr. Matthews and Mr. Almonte has well stated our intent. I think I know the commission has long discussed the need for LED lighting conversion, and so it is. It is one of the tools that we need to think about strategizing for smart cities. And right now, we have no strategic smart city strategy in terms of prioritizing. What's our project? We have a lot of projects that we have arms in from mobility initiatives to street lighting initiatives to even other types of wireless efforts. And so I think what we want to do is to create as Assistant Manager Matthew said, a cross-departmental effort, and where we have all the departments contributing to it and then coming back to prioritize, this is what we will be able to accomplish, short-term and long-term. So the LED lighting is one of those. I think we wanted to take a step and see, first of all, let's do it in terms of not only in the right of way, but in terms of where we are as a responsible owner of some of our assets, parking lots. but also to talk about the other kind of connectivity that we wanted to have and capabilities attached to those poles. Do we need, all of the smart adaptability and sensory elements on the pole, or what things are we trying to accomplish? And so I would like to see, as we roll this out, to have a part of our community where we have, if you will, an outdoor lab, where we have, where we try to pilot things regarding mobility, lighting, all in one area, and that becomes the test to deploying it throughout the community. And so we've done that, with the medical mile and some of the other areas here downtown. I think we just need to kind of test all of our, first of all, identify all of our smart initiatives and figure out where can we begin to test it and deploy it.
Okay. All right. Other questions?
Yeah, I just want to underscore, I completely understand what you're talking about because we have had failures in our primary circuit. So very happy to see that we're addressing that this year and that we are really going to look at this more broadly in a strategic plan because Smart Cities does cross all departments. We're looking at identifying where you can park as well as where we need more light in the city and what kind of light. So I'm really excited to see that we're going to look at this more broadly.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Turning back to our city manager.
All right. And again, I just want to highlight, under this area, we would normally talk about some of the other enhancements we were doing for the workforce, but those conversations are still ongoing in bargaining, and we're unable to unveil any of that, but I'm looking forward to a successful outcome of all of the negotiations. So we'll go on to the next section.
Okay. So now we're going to move on to engaged in connected community. Engaged and connected, we've got $291,000 in operating investments as well as $569 in new capital investments. Operationally, that breaks down in both enhanced communication and community engagement. That community engagement includes investment in the 2020 census efforts is one of the more notable items that's in there. As well as adding some resources to be able to fulfill some of the basic requirements of being able to effectively communicate and engage. From a capital investment standpoint, we've got the new e-poll book laptops with the clerk's office to improve connectivity and accessibility in the elections. And then we've got some upgrades planned for the cable television station. It's important to note on those that that's specifically what we call PEG funding, public educational government funding, that comes through franchise fees, which means the only thing that we can use it on is infrastructure related to the television station. So with that, look forward to this discussion.
All right. Commissioners, questions? I think in our strategic plan, it pretty clearly lays out our goals related to improving community engagement and communications. I think it's, we have quite a few goals laid out in that section, and glad to have Mr. Matthews here with your experience to help us really move forward. I think all of us around this table have long noted the need to improve not just community engagement, but also communication, and then also to have a really strategic, thoughtful plan so that it wasn't so fragmented throughout the organization. And then I know some of you were engaged in the early conversations with Urban Core Collective around authentic community engagement. What does that mean? And so I'm glad to see this move forward. So Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Kelly?
Just be interested in hearing some ideas when the time comes about how we're going to reach some of those communities that we haven't heard from.
Right.
Again, referring to our meeting last night that Bengoy put together, for example. A lot of our refugee communities who are talking about how they are really struggling to communicate and dealing with sometimes mental health issues because they are coming from areas around the world where they have experienced trauma. But I just think that this is so important. I think back to a conversation I had with someone on your millennial group, Mayor, who, they were reaching out to commissioners just to meet us and talking about how they wanted to support some of our efforts here, our policy changes and so on. And one of those individuals shared with me that he came from a community in Michigan that was rich in assets, but there was very little community engagement, and what a huge difference it made in the community in terms of problem solving. So I'm really proud of the work we've done so far, and looking forward to continued work and outreach to those communities that we haven't heard from yet.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Commissioner?
So I'm still lost, I'm sorry. So I'm looking now at this document. And, but the numbers on here do not match the PowerPoint. And I'm just still trying to track what I'm supposed to be, I'm just trying to track, sorry. So when I see 569,000 in new capital investments under engaged and connected community, I'm not seeing like the line items here that match that. I am seeing the 210,000 in general fund dollars out of the 291,000. And I can see where that's probably these line items, but then the 569,000 are all missing from this document, or am I missing something?
210 plus 81 is 291.
So you have the 210, 81, and the, I don't think we highlighted the capital on this one.
On this?
Yeah, so
Okay.
the 210 tracks to the 210, can you pull up a slide number 28, please?
The 210 in the general fund?
Yeah, 210 from general fund, and you see on the supplemental, the 81,000 in
So
personnel
it's
request.
it's that second box on
Right.
number 9, right? The
Right. The
210?
The first one tracks to the 81, and that's in the PowerPoint.
Yeah,
I think
so
we just need
this-
to break
yeah,
down
all
of the
of this is-
capital.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just the new capital investments are,
Right. Yep, we can.
are they somewhere else?
They are.
Okay,
So,
in the slide, on the
no,
slides?
they're not in the, pardon me, they're not in the slides, Commissioner. They are in the budget book.
Okay,
And so
right.
these were totaled, what you have in the quick guide is operating and non-operating investments, not capital.
Okay,
And so the budget is in the capital. And so if you look at the capital reserve fund, for example, if we'd like to do that, we can direct you to the page where it's shown in the budget.
okay, I can go through that section to make the connection.
But they
Okay.
are all the PEG investments are listed for 569.
I'm following now, thank you.
Yep.
So,
Following now.
so for me, but Commissioner Hay, I'm glad you pointed that out, because on page 9, I'm glad to see included in this budget some resources for the census, knowing that that's really critical in many ways. And then also, we around this table have talked, I believe, this will be our 3rd year, talking about the need for a community survey to get feedback and to have benchmark data on how we're doing so that we can measure progress. And there's funding in this budget, again, for that community survey piece. And I know there's actually a couple items, whether it's the digital survey that we want to do or this survey. And so I'm curious in regards to the community survey, what the plan is. Will that happen actually this calendar year still? Because I think that is important for our strategic plan to have some benchmarks where we currently don't have data. I think the community survey will build that in so that we then can use that information as we move forward to measure progress.
Can I piggyback on that question, Mayor? Because I also was wondering for the community survey if the illicit survey that's being used for the PD,
Right.
if we would combine
Yeah.
some of what they're trying to collect from there into the community survey, so then it's more comprehensive. So just curious about that too.
So this is a fiscal plan to fund strategy. We have not developed implementation plans for everything that's proposed.
Okay.
But the implementation strategy is to do the community survey before the development of the next year's budget, so we will be able to have the feedback in advance. Obviously, that's one survey that a department is doing, but there's other individual departmental surveys that other departments are doing now, and so we're going to have to work on the transition to see if it is a unilateral survey that we use overall, or is this yet another tool that departments will have, but one that gives us more comprehensive measurement across not just the city, but across the country. Going back to the capital fund, that $569,000, I believe, is strictly for the community cable television equipment, and it's restricted capital funding, so it's all there.
And then on this sheet, on page 9, I think the census support, there should be a yes under whether it's impacting the general fund, if how this is allocated is accurate, because it's included in that 210,000. So I just, because it was missing, I just thought I'd share that.
Oh, yeah, good catch.
I wish it was a no.
Yeah, right. I think this is a question for Doug, Mr. Matthews. But can you just maybe just share a little bit about the shift from a digital media person to kind of the temporary support of that? I know that that's a huge part of our communication strategy that we've talked about before, so just interested in that shift a little bit.
Honestly, that was a shift based on the fiscal considerations. As we started working our way through which personnel we felt like we were ready to invest in, I too believe that that's somewhere that we need to be making investments. This gives us a bridge, I think, to where it is that we want to go. I think a lot of these things, when you talk about communications and engagement, build those bridges to ultimately what it is that we want to do. So digital inclusion is linked to digital engagement. This is linked to how we build and implement our social media strategy. So it's an incremental approach, but sometimes both operational and fiscally, you've got to do it incrementally to make sure you get it right. Thanks.
All right, commissioners, other questions on these sections that we reviewed today?
I just wanted to, if there's no other questions on this section, just overall, I just wanted to, we talked about health and environment and the need to improve awareness as part of our effort in the continuation of Third Ward Equity Fund. And I think there was $50,000 related to that educational effort. And I kind of in line with the digital inclusion and the social media specialist in-house versus contracting. I think we took a similar approach on the educational effort for the lead-based paint initiative, and we had thought before maybe about contracting those services out, but I think we're taking a look to determine whether or not we have the capacity now with our added bandwidth and expertise to do some of that in-house or some combination.
Well, yeah,
expand on that?
it's important that we start demonstrating where it is that we want to take things. And the first step in that is to take a look at where we either currently or in the future we plan to use contractual dollars to do the work, and start asking the question, how can we utilize this as an opportunity to demonstrate what we can do as an organization? Because There are times where you want to bring in that outside assistance, but there are also times where you benefit from the longitudinal involvement of having somebody that's showing up to the office every day focused on the work. It also gives you the opportunity to leverage that talent, not just in one area that, say, a contractor was hired to do, but in other areas where we feel like we can leverage it and demonstrate both the opportunity and in some cases the need, which goes back to the broader budget conversation.
So are you saying we have the capabilities to have someone in-house to do this type of work?
What I'm saying is that with the contractual dollars we've set aside, that we have an opportunity in this coming year, rather than contracting a company to do the work, bring temporary employees in to do the work that can work with our teams in executing it with an eye towards what the team ought to look like in future budget years.
So, okay, I'm just want to make sure I'm tracking what you're saying. So is that similar to the idea that we have around bringing in or building up, let's say, our interns or temporary staff to work with to be more targeted in our approach at diversifying talent to potentially then utilize them long-term? Is that, I mean, are you seeing this as kind of connected to our overall goals around grow your own and bring in talent and
Absolutely.
potentially have them be a part of the organization?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Provided
I'm-
that we've got the resources to do so, absolutely. We know we have needs. We know that a two-person communication shop is not going to effectively meet the needs of the organization. But we also know that given the fiscal realities, we can't, at this point, we've got to make some decisions about where we make those investments in this budget year.
And I think the other thing that we have an opportunity to do is to become more federated in our communication and engagement efforts across the cities. There are very few departments where it's a person's job, but I think now we can have more synergy and alignment to where we are putting teams together across the organization. And that will help with capacity building as well. But I specifically lifted the issue on the public awareness on lead-based paint because I wanted to make sure that, that was a specific policy discussion that we had on the dais when we were identifying the allocations for Third Ward Equity Fund. And we had some discussions about how to operationalize that, and I think we primarily talked about contracting. And there's been somewhat of a shift, because at the time, Assistant City Manager Matthews was not on board, and he came on board and said, let's, after hearing where we've been, thought that it might be good for us to take a crack at doing it in-house.
So, Mr. City Manager, I thank you for bringing that up. And actually in clarifying that the original intent and the decision that the commission made was to issue an RFP to hire a third party. I am rarely in favor of hiring just to hire because I know the long-term impact of hiring people and how costly that is. And so I'm very concerned with this being the method of trying to develop a lead awareness campaign by hiring someone, even if we're now saying it's temporary. Because what I also know is that we frequently forget about the original intent of some of the decisions that we make, especially as it relates to positions. This body and its frequent change because of term limits will allow us to forget even more frequently, to be honest, and what the intent is. And so I am still advocating for going the route that we had agreed to. I also am concerned that with the minimum dollars that were allocated for the Third Ward Equity Fund, that we're choosing to guinea pig the Third Ward Equity Fund funding for our trial and trying to see if it works to try to have a temporary employee come in to do, so that we can prove that we can do things in-house. I think that there are other projects that I'd probably support doing that with, but this is very sensitive to me personally, and for a number of reasons that hopefully most of you are already aware. But I'm really concerned.
Well, thank you, Commissioner, for the feedback. The good news is that the budget has enough resources to do it either way. And so your decision to provide funding in the budget will allow us to make sure that we execute the best implementation strategy. So what's before you today is not the method of doing it, it's the funding that's necessary. And so I think what I propose is to roll over any unspent funding from the Third Ward Equity Fund to include those that are uncommitted, and I think we will definitely land on the right implementation to make sure that all those concerns are addressed, as well as the sustainability, because even if we contract out for it, it's not something that we're going to solve in 1 year. And so there's going to be the need to have continual awareness beyond that contract period. And so we do need to build some organizational muscle and capacity for it either way, whether it's through contract resources or through supplementing existing staffing. But I hear your concerns, and we'll make sure we address those.
Thank you. Well, and I'll just add one thing, and I believe it was Commissioner Lanier who brought this up during our lead meeting. It's very likely that if we're going to have a robust lead awareness campaign, that we'll need funds for radio and billboards and other, other means of getting the word out. But I'm sure Mr. Matthews is already thinking about that with his experience. So I'll just add that, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. I would also hope that in our efforts around the lead issue that we are both intentional as well as unapologetic in our efforts to be inclusive of other players around the space, whether it's our friends next door at the county, whether it's the folks at the state level, whether it's philanthropy. There's, I think, the need to have more of a all-hands-on-deck approach. And to my colleagues' remark, this is something that you would hope that everyone in the room and even outside this room would be genuinely concerned about, based on the impact that it's having on our community. And again, recognizing that I think it's fair to say that the efforts that have been put forth in trying to deal with the issue in Flint have not been as fluid, no pun intended, as it needed to be. But here we are in a city that has the highest level of lead with regards to the paint in the state. And so I just think that probably now more than ever, there's an opportunity to really aggressively seek to go at this issue in a very, very significant way. And we shouldn't be at all shy about reaching out to, again, the folks who also have the resources to assist with this. So.
Yeah, Mayor, if I could add. I liked Mark's comment about a federated approach, because I think about how when we were getting through the recession and we got the state involved in setting up this financial management system, and we partnered with Livonia and the county, and we've got another statewide problem here. So along with our sister cities, you mentioned Flint, I think we could develop some of that political support for getting the kind of funding that we really need at the state, because this is such a huge problem. So I like the city manager's comment about reaching out to other communities and working with them to really take this on.
Yeah. And we have been having conversations at the state level and with other cities And then we are also, many of you know, in the process of looking with a team of researchers out of Chicago at our own internal ordinances. Hopefully, we'll have that report by June, and then we'll be able to take that up here around this table, looking at our own internal policies. But I do think that there's some incredible opportunities, and I was very happy to see that the county supported additional funding for investigators, because this is a multi-jurisdictional problem, and we need a multi-jurisdictional solution, so, yeah. All right, other questions or comments? All right, City Manager, turn it back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Can we go to the next slide on the schedules? So on the 7th, we will come back and have additional conversation around those three areas. I know that we'll probably, today we got through the presentation rather quickly.
Well, we have executive session.
Yeah.
We're not done yet. Don't get out, don't leave.
I mean, if you want to talk for another couple of hours about this, then we're happy to, but.
We did push off the meaty topics until next week because Commissioner O'Connor is not here, so.
Or we got through it because he's not here. No. Don't tell him I said that. Don't tell him I said that. Do not tell him I said that.
This is on TV.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Remember, we did a lot of this work ahead of time with our
We did.
strategic planning.
We did.
Which we had not done before, so.
We did that, and so that aided.
Hours.
That's right. You put in the work well before the presentation of the budget, and that helps with the conversations, and the staff has done a good job. I want to thank all the presenters today for a good job. I do anticipate the next session will be a little bit longer, more in depth. And we'll start to talk about these, the intersections of these, even as we talked about engagement today in an engaged and connected community. When we talk about public safety, that'll be another opportunity to even speak more about engagement, but specifically related to public safety and economic development. We'll talk more about engagement and helping small business owners and through the various processes that we have here. So I look forward to that dialogue, and we'll have another team sharing. I do want to, one other thing, I know that some of the other appointees, we didn't highlight that today in terms of the resources that are there in the budget, but wanted to give, acknowledge, I think for the most part, all of your other appointees also identified resources, as well as our city's comptroller also asked for resources for FY20 under governmental excellence. And so the recommendations are in the budget. It's in there for your consideration, but they all ask for probably more than what I recommended in the budget, and it's just a matter of prioritization and decision making. Every department asked for more than I was able to recommend. So it is for your consideration. If you have a different perspective and think that they need to be resourced more, that is the opportunity you have as part of the budget process.
All right, thank you. All right, so with that, Commissioners, I'm going to ask for a motion to take us into executive session to discuss labor negotiations. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support. All right, and this is a voice vote, so Commissioner Jones?
My answer is yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Lanier?
Yes.
Commissioner Repart?
Yes.
Commissioner Moody?
Yes.
And Commissioner Kelly? Yes. And yes for me. All right, so Commissioners, please go down to 6th floor, City Attorney's office, and we will re-engage there.